great place. In case you didn't know, New York was once controlled by the Dutch, and it was named New Netherlands.
New York City was then called New Amsterdam. Isn't that funny? Well, I think it is.
Peter Stuyvesant was the Dutch governor who didn't really allow for any political freedom. Thankfully for the New Netherlanders, the English stole it away.
Actually, the Dutch who lived there helped the English conqueror
Stuyvesant. The English then renamed the colony after the King's Bro, the Duke of York. Get it? New York, Duke of York. Are you with me here?
This colony was founded to make money. Beaver fur was the name of the game. Beaver fur hats were all the rage in Europe. The black hat pictured here is made from beaver fur. Beavers were also, actually, at this point, beavers were almost hunted to extinction in this part of America, and all in the name of fashion. Can you believe it?
All right, let's talk about something else that's important, and that's the Trial of Peter Zenger. Funny name, I know. Peter, you see, criticized the royal governor. Not a big deal, you say? Well, not now, but back then it was huge. You see, the First Amendment, freedom of speech, did not exist yet. So Peter was put on trial for speaking out against the governor. However, he was found not guilty by the jury. The jury, you see, was made up of fellow colonists, and they didn't think that what Peter did was so bad.
This again is another example of the freedoms colonists felt they were entitled to, and will be the very first right our founding fathers felt important enough to protect in our Bill of Rights, the First Amendment. So this is a big deal.
Huge! Okay, Pennsylvania. I hate to admit this, but this is probably my favorite colony.
Me too.
Hey, look, it's the Quaker guy. His real name is William Penn. He led a religious group, the Quakers, from England to settle in Pennsylvania. Quakers were being persecuted for their religious belief.
I call them hippies before their time. They believed in treating everyone equally, including natives. They also allowed many different religious groups to practice freely without persecution. Hey, that sounds a lot different than those people in Massachusetts.
Sure does. Quakers also opposed war. In fact, they have even refused to pay taxes that support wars. When a person refuses to follow a law because of personal beliefs, it is called civil disobedience. These people still receive consequences for their actions. You can't break the law. However, this is a big part of living in our type of democracy.
We believe that you have the right to speak out against the government. Here again, we see the source of these important democratic ideals.
Maryland, founded by Lord Baltimore, and you probably also have heard of his name as being George Calvert. Okay, Lord Baltimore is his title, and Calvert is his name. And believe it or not, I don't think he ever actually went to Maryland.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yet again, we have another colony founded for religious reasons. In English history, there have been times when ruled by a Catholic queen or king, and times when a Protestant leader has taken the throne.
In the times of Protestant leaders, Catholics have been persecuted. And in times of Catholic kings or queens, Protestants were persecuted. Lord Baltimore founded Maryland as a haven for these Catholics. Maryland also instituted a Toleration Act.
This act allowed all Christians to practice freely. Maryland is sometimes considered a middle colony or a southern colony.
The Carolinas. The Carolinas were once just one colony, but later split into two. This colony was founded to make money by 8 lord proprietors.
These 8 men gathered together and pooled their money to start the colony of Carolina. This money was used to provide transportation, supplies, etc. to the first colonists to settle in Carolina.
With warm weather, long growing seasons, and fertile soil, Carolina soon became a profitable colony. A portion of this profit then went back to the 8 proprietors.
Carolina grew indigo, a plant that produces a blue dye used on fabric. Your jeans were once dyed with indigo.
Tobacco was another popular cash crop, as well as rice.
As cash crop plantations grew, so did the need for slaves. Slaves made up a big portion of the population in the Carolinas.
I also really like Georgia as well. I think it's kind of a sad situation on how it came to be, but the whole idea of giving these people a second chance is really nice.
It is nice, but, they were a lot of criminals and debtors, supposedly.
Georgia, the border state. Georgia is located between Spanish Florida and the rest of the English colonies. This colony was founded for social reasons.
In England, if you couldn't pay your bills, you were put in jail. But you couldn't make money in jail, and you couldn't be released until you paid your bills. Do you see the vicious cycle forming here?
The prisons in England were filling with these debtors. James Oglethorpe realized what was happening and offered to clean out English prisons by giving these people a second chance in the colonies.
The king, King George, thought this was a brilliant idea. He could get rid of many undesirables and place them in Georgia. This would be a great buffer between Spanish lands and the rest of the precious colonies.
Moving on to some events that took place and just some other interesting information about the colonies, the Great Awakenings. As the colonies took hold and people began to live their lives, church became second to work. A new movement began to get these colonists back to church. There were two of these movements, the First and Second Great Awakenings.
During these events, preachers traveled through the colonies holding great revivals. These usually took place in the town square and drew huge crowds. Remember, there were no movies, TV, radio, so when an event like this took place, everyone came out to see and hear the preachers.
These preachers gave emotional speeches that were really powerful about the colonies, the Great Awakenings. As the colonies took hold and people began to live their lives, church became second to work. A new movement began to get these colonists back to church. There were two of these movements, the First and Second Great Awakenings.
During these events, preachers traveled through the colonies holding great revivals. These usually took place in the town square and drew huge crowds. Remember, there were no movies, TV, radio, so when an event like this took place, everyone came out to see and hear the preachers.
These preachers gave emotional speeches that were really powerful. This really started even more Protestant churches in the colonies. Churches like the Methodists, Baptists, Presbyterians. Some that started during this time. This religious movement actually helped to spread democratic ideas.
Not only were people participating in making church decisions and becoming more accustomed to having a say, but through church ideas, people were taught to treat people equally. This led to less class division and better treatment of all white people. White people. Slaves at this time were not considered equals to white colonists.
The Navigation Acts. As we have mentioned, many colonies were founded for economic reasons. England owned all the colonies, and the number one goal of kings and queens was to make money. So they used the colonies to do just that.
One way they accomplished this goal was through the Navigation Acts. These acts controlled all of the trade of the colonies. You see, the colonies were filled with all kinds of natural resources. Lumber, iron, fur. The colonies were then forced to ship all of these natural resources as raw materials.
Britain would then turn these raw materials into finished products and sell them back to the colonies. Sounds like a good deal, but here's the catch. Colonists were forced to sell their raw materials for cheap and buy the finished products for any price that the British merchants set. Since they were not allowed to trade with other countries, Britain controlled the entire pricing market.
Boo is right. To add salt to the wound, colonists also had to pay taxes on these goods. As you can imagine, the colonists took every advantage of being so far away from England to circumvent or ignore these laws. As colonists were periodically ignored by the British, they developed their own trading agreements with other countries.
This is where smuggling comes in. Smuggling was a huge business on the coast of the colonies. In fact, you can still find hidden passages and secret rooms in many old houses on the coast that served as places to hide smuggled goods from British officials. Colonists became accustomed to the idea of free enterprise, meaning they could trade with whomever they wanted and conduct their business with little government interference. This is an important idea in our country, and our founding fathers made sure to protect it. Triangular trade route. As we mentioned with the Navigation Acts, colonists were forced to send raw materials to only England, and in turn bought finished products from England. This trade route became known as the triangular trade route. Look closely at the arrows to see exactly how this trade worked.
One leg of the triangular trade route involved the taking of Africans from Africa and bringing them to the West Indies and onto the colonies as slaves. This passage was known as the Middle Passage. Conditions on these boats was horrendous. The image on this slide gives you only a small idea of how packed in Africans were on these ships. They were chained to each other as well as the boat itself. They were kept under deck with few, if any, chances for fresh air. Conditions were less than humane, and many Africans died on this journey. Slavery is a definite black mark on our history. It is one we must study as to never let it happen again.
On to a more pleasant subject, the scientific revolution. Even after the period of the Renaissance, Europeans continued to expand their knowledge of the world. This led to the scientific revolution. This is where we see Galileo discover that the Earth is not the center of the universe, but instead the sun, and all the planets revolve around the sun. Isaac Newton discovers gravity, the force that keeps us on Earth.
Even in the colonies, we see some scientists and discoveries being made. Benjamin Banneker made the first American-made clock. Which, think about that for just a second. All those tiny inner workings of a clock are quite intricate. This is quite a feat to accomplish, and that wasn't his only accomplishment. Benjamin Banner helped lay out Washington D.C., which was really one of the first master plan cities.
And of course, we all recognize Benjamin Franklin's name. I do believe we could spend an entire year just studying Benjamin Franklin and all of his accomplishments. He invented bifocal glasses, wood-burning stoves, improved the printing press, dabbled with electricity, and of course, so much more. One more important time period that we must talk about is the Enlightenment, which is also referred to as the Age of Reason.
Again, as a lingering idea from the Renaissance, the Enlightenment was a period in which we see lots of philosophical thinking. Men began studying human nature and cultures and the interaction of people in their government. These thinkers right here were so important in forming our country.
This is who our founding fathers looked at when writing our Constitution and designing our government. So in case you missed this, the Enlightenment thinkers are huge, so important. John Locke really formed the idea that all people are born with certain rights and that the government's job is to protect these rights.
Wow, that sounds like a concept in our Constitution.
Yes, and specifically in the Declaration of Independence.
Oh, yeah. All men are created.
Yes,
Yeah.
very good.
Sorry.
Montesquieu
came up with ideas about how government power should be shared among different entities, like the king and parliament, or like our three branches of government.
And William Blackstone, I know some of y'all had trouble with him, helped define the legal system in England, which in turn defined the legal system in America.